They say an alpha never kneels, never begs, never breaks. But I watched the most powerful wolf king in the empire fall to his knees in the snow, begging a woman he destroyed to remember he was still a man. This is not a fairy tale about redemption. This is a bloodbath about what happens when power mistakes conquest for love, and a queen decides her dignity matters more than a crown. Stay with me until the end of this brutal truth. Like this if you believe betrayal deserves no mercy, and drop your city in the comments so I know my tribe is listening. The imperial palace of Vareth burned with celebration, but Queen Lyssara Vael felt nothing but cold. She stood behind ivory curtains on the third-floor balcony overlooking the sapphire hall, her silver gown catching moonlight like frost on a grave. Below her, the empire feasted. Golden chandeliers blazed. Musicians hammered triumph into the air with drums that sounded like war itself. Nobles dressed in obsidian and wolf fur raised glasses to conquest and glory. Dravenmoor had crushed its enemies, doubled its territory. The war was won, and her husband stood at the center of it all with another woman. Lyssara pressed one palm against the cold marble railing. The other rested over her stomach, where 7 weeks of secret life grew beneath silk and lies. The future heir, the king did not know yet. She had planned to tell him tonight, after the feast, after the speeches. When the palace quieted and she could find him alone, away from the wolves who circled his throne like scavengers waiting for weakness. But she would not tell him now. Not after what she had just heard. Lady Cerys Nocturne stood beside Alpha King Vaelor Draven like she belonged there. Her crimson gown brushed his arm with the casual intimacy of someone who had touched him in private too many times to count. Her laughter came too easily. Her hand touched his wrist with possession, not respect. Lyssara had suspected for months. The late-night war councils that lasted until dawn. The scent of foreign perfume on his clothes when he returned to their chambers smelling of smoke and sweat and something floral that did not grow in northern soil. The way Cerys looked at him during strategy meetings, not with the deference advisors should show their king, but with the knowing gaze of a woman who had seen him without the crown. Still, suspicion and proof are different animals. Suspicion whispers in the dark and lets you pretend it might be wrong. Proof roars in daylight and forces you to face what you already knew. And tonight, proof arrived in the form of a drunk duke who raised his glass towards Cerys and declared loud enough for half the hall to hear. The king appears happier with his war companion than his queen. Laughter rippled through the nobles like poison spreading through water. Vaelor did not step away from Cerys, did not correct the duke, did not defend his queen standing alone 3 floors above them, watching her marriage die in public. Instead, he lifted his wine glass with the same ruthless calm he used to sentence traitors to execution. His voice carried across the sapphire hall, clear and cold. Some bonds are forged by duty, others by desire. The hall erupted in cheers and knowing laughter. Men pounded tables. Women whispered behind jeweled hands. The entire court understood exactly what their king had just announced. And Lyssara felt something inside her chest crack open. Not her heart. Hearts break clean and bleed fast. This was different. This was the sound of a foundation collapsing beneath a structure that had been unstable for years. The moment when a woman realizes the marriage she has been fighting to save was already dead, and she had been the only one pretending otherwise. She had been a fool. Not because she loved him, but because she had believed love could be enough. That devotion, given long enough and selflessly enough, could thaw even the coldest heart. She had been wrong, and now she stood in a palace that celebrated conquest while her husband publicly claimed desire over duty, and she understood with brutal clarity that she had 2 choices. Stay and become the ghost of a queen, haunting corridors while another woman claimed her place, or leave and teach her child that dignity matters more than crowns. She stepped back from the railing. Her hands did not shake. Her breathing remained steady. She had learned long ago that queens do not cry in public, do not scream, do not give their enemies the satisfaction of visible pain. But in private, queens plan. And Lyssara had just made a decision that would shatter an empire. The night had started differently. Hours earlier, Lyssara had stood in her private chambers while servants fastened the silver gown and arranged moonstone pins in her pale hair. She had looked at herself in the mirror and thought, "Tonight I will tell him. Tonight the distance between them would end." Because nothing binds a man and woman like a child. Nothing forces honesty like the knowledge that a legacy is no longer abstract. Bloodlines demand more than duty. They demand presence. She had been so certain, so hopeful, so incredibly naive. Elder Merelda had warned her against hope 3 days ago when Lyssara had confided the pregnancy. The old woman had served the Draven family for 40 years. She knew the kings of this bloodline better than their own reflections. She had watched Vaelor grow from a boy into a man shaped by brutality and taught that love made rulers weak. When Lyssara told her about the child, Merelda's expression had turned grim. "You mistake endurance for peace, child." Lyssara had looked toward the window where winter light touched the palace gardens in shades of gray and white. And if peace no longer exists? Merelda had answered with the brutal honesty only the old dare speak. Then stop sacrificing yourself to preserve someone else's illusion. But Lyssara had ignored the warning. She had believed that a child would change everything, that fatherhood would crack open whatever wall Vaelor had built around his heart and force him to see what stood right in front of him. A woman who loved him, not his power, not his crown, not his empire, just him, the man beneath the armor. But she had been wrong about that too, because Vaelor did not want to be seen as just a man. He wanted to be worshipped as a king. And worship does not require intimacy. It only requires distance. The affair between Vaelor and Cerys had begun during the southern campaign 8 months ago. Lyssara knew the exact night because she remembered it with the kind of clarity that trauma burns into memory. Vaelor had returned to their chambers near dawn, still wearing his battlefield leathers, smelling of smoke and sweat, and something floral that did not belong on a man who had spent the day killing. He had kissed her forehead with lips that tasted like wine and lies, told her the battle had been won, then collapsed into their bed without another word. She had lain beside him in the dark, listening to him breathe, and known something had changed. Not suspected. Known. The way a person knows when a foundation is cracked, even if they cannot see the damage yet. That was the first time. Then came others. One night became two. Two became habit. Habit became routine. And routine became the kind of betrayal that walks openly through palace halls because everyone knows and no one speaks. Because speaking would require action, and action would disrupt power. And power, in places like Vareth, mattered more than truth. Cerys was everything Lyssara was not. Sharp where Lyssara was gentle. Aggressive where Lyssara was patient. Ambitious where Lyssara believed in duty over glory. Cerys understood men like Vaelor because she was carved from the same stone. Cold. Calculating. Brilliant in the way that predators are brilliant when they hunt. Widowed young, Cerys had clawed her way into military strategy councils through intelligence and ruthlessness. She understood conquest. She rode beside Vaelor during war. She advised him on siege tactics and political manipulation with the kind of cold precision that men like Vaelor mistook for partnership. But it was not partnership. It was feeding. Two people using each other to fill the void that power carves into the soul. Loneliness wrapped in ambition. Hunger disguised as connection. And Vaelor, for all his strength and dominance and terrifying intelligence, had been too blind to see it. Or perhaps he had seen it and simply did not care, because caring required vulnerability. And vulnerability, in his world, meant weakness. Vaelor had been raised by a father who believed love made kings weak. Emperor Kael Draven had ruled with an iron fist and a frozen heart. He had taught his son one philosophy above all others. A king who needs love becomes vulnerable to betrayal. So Vaelor had learned to rule without it. He had learned to take pleasure where he found it and call it enough. He had learned to mistake admiration for affection and desire for devotion. He respected Lyssara, admired her intelligence, appreciated her beauty the way a man appreciates fine art in a gallery. But he had never opened the part of himself that holds tenderness without calculation. Their mating bond had awakened during the wedding ceremony like wildfire beneath snow. Deep, ancient, irrevocable, the kind of bond that legends claimed could not be denied, but the bond only connected their wolves. It did not force their hearts to follow, and Vaelor had chosen to ignore the bond's pull in favor of something easier. Desire. Cerys offered no emotional demands, no expectations of tenderness, no requirement that he be anything other than the conqueror the empire proclaimed him to be. Just mutual hunger and the intoxicating escape of bodies colliding without consequence. Or so he thought, because betrayal always carries consequence. The cost just arrives later than expected. And tonight, standing alone on a balcony while the Empire celebrated and her husband claimed desire over duty, Lyssara had become the bill coming due. She left the balcony and walked through the shadowed corridors of the palace with the kind of calm that comes after a decision has been made. No more doubt, no more hope, just clarity. Servants bowed as she passed, their eyes sliding away from hers like water off stone. They knew. Of course they knew. Servants always know first because they see everything that matters and nothing that gets recorded in history. They see the messages passed in secret, the doors that close too quickly, the way a king's mistress leaves war councils long after midnight while the queen sits alone in chambers that grow colder by the season. They had watched Lyssara endure it all in silence, and they had pitied her. But pity does not change reality. And reality, Lyssara had finally accepted, was this. She had married a man who valued power over love, conquest over connection, and his own comfort over her dignity. And no amount of patience or devotion or silent suffering would change him. Because change requires wanting to be different. And Vaelor did not want to be different. He wanted to be king. And kings, in his understanding, did not answer to anyone, not even their queens. Lyssara reached her private chambers and dismissed the attendants with a single gesture. The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded like finality. She stood in the center of the room for a long moment, looking at the space that had been hers for 3 years. The bed where she had slept alone more nights than not. The desk where she had written letters to northern houses, trying to maintain the political alliance her marriage was supposed to represent. The wardrobe filled with gowns she had worn to feasts and ceremonies, and council meetings where her opinion was tolerated but never truly valued. This had never been home. It had been a cage dressed up as a palace, and she was done pretending otherwise. She walked to the wardrobe and pulled out a leather travel pack that had belonged to her mother. Then she began filling it with practical clothing, wool tunics, fur-lined cloaks, leather pants, boots made for walking, not ceremony, no gowns, no crowns, no jewelry except the silver ring her mother had given her before dying, the one piece of metal she wore that had nothing to do with being queen. She worked methodically, her movements efficient and calm. No tears, no hesitation, no dramatic farewell speeches to empty rooms. This was not rage. Rage burns hot and fast and leaves nothing but ash. This was something colder and more permanent. This was a woman who had reached the end of endurance and discovered that dignity mattered more than love, that self-respect was not negotiable, that some betrayals cannot be forgiven because forgiveness requires the betrayer to understand what they destroyed. And Vaelor did not understand. He saw her as duty, as political alliance, as the quiet, patient queen who would endure anything because that was what queens did. But he did not see her as Lyssara, as a woman with limits, as someone whose love, given freely for years, had value that could be lost. And she was done trying to make him see. She removed the moonstone crown from her head, feeling the weight lift like shackles breaking. Then she unclasped the silver wedding chain from her throat, the one that marked her as bonded to the king. She laid both on the bed carefully, not thrown in anger, not abandoned in haste, placed with intention, because this was not impulse. This was choice. No letter, no explanation, no accusation written in careful script for him to read and dismiss as emotion. Only silence. Because sometimes the loudest statement a person can make is absence. Sometimes the only way to be heard is to stop speaking entirely. She pulled on the traveling cloak, fastened the pack across her shoulders, and walked to the hidden servant passage that led beyond the palace walls. Every royal chamber had one, built centuries ago for emergencies and escapes. Lyssara had discovered it during her first month in the palace, back when she had still believed this place could become home if she just tried hard enough. She had been wrong about that too. Merelda waited in the passage, holding a lantern that cast long shadows on stone walls. The old woman said nothing at first. She simply looked at Lyssara with eyes that had seen too many women break themselves trying to fix men who did not want to be fixed. Then she handed Lyssara a leather pouch heavy with silver coins and a map marked with routes through the northern forests. "Where will you go?" Merelda whispered, her voice barely louder than breath. Lyssara looked back toward the chambers one final time, toward the life she had tried to build, toward the man who had chosen desire over devotion, toward the crown she would no longer sacrifice herself to wear, somewhere he will never think to look. The old woman nodded slowly. Then go quickly, child, before the bond realizes you are leaving. But Lyssara already felt it. The mating bond stretched between her and Vaelor, like a rope pulling tighter with every step she took away from him. It screamed at her to return, to stay, to endure. The wolf inside her howled in protest, desperate to return to its mate. But Lyssara was more than her wolf. She was a woman who had finally learned that endurance without respect is not strength. It is slow death. And she refused to die quietly in a palace that did not value her. She stepped into the passage, and Merelda closed the door behind her with a soft thud that sounded like a coffin lid sealing. The darkness swallowed her whole, and Lyssara walked forward without looking back, one hand pressed to her stomach where new life grew in the ruins of everything else. By dawn, the Queen of Dravenmoor had vanished, and she carried the king's only heir with her into exile. Vaelor discovered her absence 3 hours after sunrise. He had returned to their chambers still drunk on victory wine and the validation of nobles who cheered his name like he was a god made flesh. The feast had lasted until the early morning, longer than he had intended to stay. But the night had felt good, triumphant. Cerys had been there, laughing at his jokes, touching his arm with casual intimacy, making him feel like the conqueror the Empire proclaimed him to be. He had not thought of Lyssara once, not during the toasts when men praised his military genius, not during the dancing when Cerys had moved close enough for him to smell her perfume, not when the Duke made his comment and the hall erupted in laughter that felt like approval. Vaelor had simply raised his glass and said the words that felt true in the moment, the kind of philosophical observation that made him sound wise rather than cruel. Some bonds are forged by duty, others by desire. The hall had loved it. They had cheered and laughed and raised their glasses in agreement because they understood what he meant. That marriages like his were political arrangements, that kings took comfort where they wished, that desire mattered more than obligation. He had meant it as clever deflection, a way to acknowledge the obvious without admitting fault. But words carry weight whether the speaker intends it or not, and those words had killed his marriage. He just did not know it yet. Vaelor entered the royal chambers expecting to find Lyssara asleep in their bed, her pale hair spread across the pillow like moonlight on snow. The bed was empty. He frowned, assuming she had risen early, perhaps walking in the gardens, perhaps attending morning prayer at the chapel, though she rarely did that anymore. Then he saw the crown. It sat on her pillow perfectly centered, deliberate. The silver wedding chain lay coiled beside it like a snake that had shed its skin. Vaelor stared at them for a long moment, his mind slow from wine and exhaustion. Then understanding hit him like cold water. She left. Not for a walk. Not for prayer. She left. He crossed the room in 3 strides and threw open the wardrobe. Gowns hung in neat rows, untouched. But the practical clothing was gone. Boots, cloaks, travel gear, everything a person would need to disappear. His chest tightened. He turned and shouted for the guards. They arrived within seconds, weapons drawn, expecting attack. "Where's the queen?" Vaelor demanded, his voice sharp as broken glass. The guards exchanged glances, confused. "We assumed she was with you, Your Majesty." Vaelor felt the first real pulse of unease, the kind that starts in the gut and spreads like poison. He walked through the chambers with growing urgency, checked the bathing room, the study, the balcony where she sometimes stood watching the city below. All empty. He returned to the main chamber and saw things he had missed in his initial panic. Her personal items were gone, the small things that made a space hers, the book she had been reading, the silver brush her mother had given her, the writing kit where she composed letters to her family in the north. Gone. All of it. This was not a woman who had left in anger and would return after calming down. This was a woman who had planned her escape and executed it with precision. Vaelor reached for the mating bond, the connection that tied their wolves together across any distance. It was there, alive and pulsing, but stretched thin, distant, like she was already miles away and moving farther with every moment. His hands clenched into fists. He turned to the captain of the guard, a grizzled warrior named Torvin who had served the Draven family for 20 years. "Find her, now!" Torvin hesitated, his scarred face uncertain. Your Majesty, if the Queen wishes privacy. Vaelor's eyes went cold, the kind of cold that preceded executions. I did not ask for your opinion. I gave you an order. Find her. The command carried the weight of an alpha who did not tolerate disobedience or questions. Torvin bowed quickly. Yes, Your Majesty. Within the hour, search parties rode out in every direction. Vaelor sent trackers into the forest with orders to follow any trail, no matter how faint. Scouts to the borders with descriptions of the Queen and warnings that she was not to leave Imperial territory, messengers to allied houses asking if they had given her shelter. But Lyssara had vanished like smoke and wind. No trail. No scent the trackers could follow past the palace walls. No witness who saw her leave or knew which direction she had gone. It was as if the earth had swallowed her whole. By midday, panic began threading through the palace like cracks spreading through ice. Not because the nobility loved the Queen, most of them barely knew her beyond formal ceremonies and state dinners where she sat beside the throne, looking beautiful and saying little. But her disappearance created political chaos, and chaos meant opportunity for enemies. A missing queen meant instability in the royal house. Instability meant weakness, and weakness invited vultures. The council convened an emergency session within the war room, a circular chamber with stone walls and a massive table carved from black oak. Vaelor sat at the head of the table, his expression carved from the same stone as the walls. Around him, advisors argued about containment strategies and political messaging. We must control the narrative, declared Lord Mathis, a political advisor who had served 3 kings and survived them all through careful neutrality. If word spreads that the Queen abandoned the throne, it will embolden rebellion in the northern houses. She is the daughter of the Northern Alliance, added another advisor nervously. Her family will see this as an insult. They may withdraw their support. We cannot allow this to become a scandal, a third voice joined. The Empire has enemies who will use any sign of internal discord. Vaelor sat in silence, listening to them discuss Lyssara like she was a political asset that had malfunctioned rather than a person. A woman, his wife. Saris sat 3 seats down from him, her expression calm and measured. She did not look concerned about Lyssara's disappearance. She looked calculating, like a player studying a game board and planning her next move. We must control the narrative, she said, echoing Lord Mathis. If word spreads that the Queen abandoned the throne, it will embolden our enemies. Vaelor's eyes cut toward her, sharp as blades. The Queen did not abandon anything. Saris met his gaze without flinching, her voice steady. Then where is she, Your Majesty? Silence fell across the table like a shroud. Every advisor looked at Vaelor, waiting for an answer. He had none, because he had not asked himself the question that mattered most. Not where is she, but why did she leave? He knew about the affair, knew she had likely discovered it months ago because secrets like that never stayed hidden in palaces where servants gossiped and nobles watched for advantage. But he had assumed queens endured such things. That duty and the bond and the weight of the crown would keep her tethered despite personal pain, that she would suffer in silence the way royal wives had suffered for centuries. He had assumed wrong. And now, sitting in a council chamber surrounded by men and women who saw his wife's disappearance as a political problem rather than a human crisis, Vaelor began to feel something unfamiliar crawling through his chest. Guilt. Not the abstract guilt of knowing he had done something wrong, but the visceral, choking guilt of realizing he had destroyed something irreplaceable. He stood abruptly, cutting off the debate. Continue the search. Double the patrols. I want every road watched, every port monitored. She cannot have gone far. But even as he said it, the bond told him otherwise. She was far, and getting farther, and some part of him, buried beneath pride and denial, understood that she had not left on impulse. She had left because she had finally reached the limit of what she would endure, and he had pushed her past it. Days passed like stones dropping into dark water. Then a week. The search parties returned empty-handed, frustrated, and exhausted. Lyssara had vanished as if she had never existed. The bond remained stretched but alive, which meant she lived somewhere beyond his reach, but it gave no direction. No clue. Just the constant, aching pull of distance. The palace began to fracture under the weight of uncertainty. Northern lords sent letters demanding answers, their tone shifting from concern to accusation. What had the king done to drive away their daughter? Why had she fled in secret rather than returning home? Was this an insult to the Northern Alliance? Allied houses questioned Vaelor's stability. A king who could not even keep his own wife was a king who might not keep his throne. Enemies whispered about divine punishment for a ruler who had betrayed his mate bond. The wolves of Dravenmoor valued bonds above all else. A king who dishonored his was a king who dishonored the empire. And through it all, Cerys maneuvered. She attended every council meeting without being asked, offered solutions with the confidence of someone who belonged at the table, positioned herself as the steady hand in chaos, the voice of reason when others panicked. She never openly suggested replacing Lyssara. She was far too intelligent for that. But she made herself indispensable in the queen's absence, and everyone noticed. 2 weeks after Lyssara vanished, Cerys approached Vaelor in his private study. He sat alone at his desk, staring at maps that showed every corner of the empire. Somewhere in those forests or mountains or coastlines, Lyssara hid. Somewhere his mate lived and breathed and grew farther from him with each passing day, and he could not find her. Cerys closed the door behind her softly, the sound deliberate. "You are torturing yourself." Vaelor did not look up from the maps. "Leave." She moved closer instead, her footsteps quiet on the stone floor. "The Empire needs certainty, Vaelor. A missing queen creates a vacuum of power. Nature abhors a vacuum." He finally raised his eyes to meet hers. "What are you suggesting?" Her expression remained calm, controlled. The mask of a woman who had practiced this conversation. "I am suggesting that sentiment cannot govern an empire. Lyssara made her choice. She left. If she will not return, you must move forward." His jaw tightened, muscle jumping beneath skin. Move forward how? She stepped closer still, close enough that he could smell her perfume, the same scent he used to associate with escape, and now only made him feel sick. Her voice dropped to something almost intimate. "Marry strength, not sentiment." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Vaelor stared at her. And for the first time since the affair began, he saw clearly. Not the brilliant strategist who advised him during war, not the companion who understood conquest and ambition, not the woman who matched his darkness. He saw ambition, raw, unfiltered, naked. Cerys had never loved him. She had loved proximity to power. The affair had not been passion or connection or even genuine desire. It had been positioning, a strategic move by a brilliant player who recognized an opportunity when she saw one, a lonely king, a distant queen, a gap she could fill. And she had waited patiently, playing her role with precision until the perfect moment arrived to make her final move. Lyssara's disappearance had not been a tragedy to Cerys. It had been an opening. Vaelor stood slowly, his chair scraping against stone. His voice came out low. Dangerous. The tone he used before ordering executions. "Get out." Cerys blinked, her mask slipping for just a fraction of a second. Confusion, then calculation as she adjusted. "Vaelor, I only meant, get out of my study before I have you dragged out." Her expression flickered. For just a moment, the carefully constructed facade cracked. Fury flashed in her eyes. Raw and ugly and honest. Then she smoothed it away like water over stone and turned toward the door with rigid dignity. Her voice came out cold. "You will regret this." Vaelor watched her leave. His hands clenched so tight his knuckles went white. The door closed, and he stood alone in the study, surrounded by maps that led nowhere, and the crushing realization that he had destroyed everything that mattered while chasing something that never existed in the first place. He had traded love for lust, devotion for desire, a woman who saw him for a woman who saw his crown, and he had been too arrogant and too blind to understand the difference until it was too late. Keys. 3 weeks after Lyssara disappeared, the truth about Cerys emerged like rot beneath floorboards. An investigation by the royal treasurer uncovered financial records showing irregular payments from Cerys's accounts to contacts in rival houses. Not enough to be outright treason, but enough to raise questions. Deeper digging revealed she had been funneling carefully selected military information to allies she was cultivating independent of the crown. Troop movements that were not quite secret but not quite public. supply routes that enemies could use if they knew where to look, council discussions about weaknesses and border defenses. Nothing that would bring down the empire, but everything needed to build leverage and alliances that served her ambition rather than Draven more. She had used the affair to gain access to information, used Vaelor's trust to position herself as indispensable, used his loneliness to blind him to her true nature. And when Lyssara vanished, Cerys had seen it not as tragedy, but as opportunity. The final piece falling into place. The council demanded her arrest and trial for sedition. Vaelor exiled her instead. Not mercy. Pragmatism. A trial would make the affair public record, would expose his betrayal in formal testimony, would give his enemies ammunition they could use for decades. So he stripped Cerys of her titles and lands, expelled her from this empire with nothing but the clothes she wore and a single horse, erased her from court as if she had never existed. She left at dawn without ceremony or escort, riding through the gates alone. She did not look back, did not beg, did not show remorse. She simply left with the same cold calculation she had used to enter his life. And the palace remained silent. No celebration at her departure, no satisfaction at justice served. Just the hollow echo of a king who had been played by his own arrogance and discovered too late that he had destroyed the only real thing he had ever possessed. That night, Vaelor stood on the same balcony where Lyssara had watched him betray her. He looked down at the empty sapphire hall where the victory feast had been held. The chandeliers were dark now, the musicians gone. The nobles scattered back to their estates. Only silence remained. And for the first time in years, Alpha King Vaelor Draven felt something he had not allowed himself to feel since childhood. Fear. Not of enemies who might invade. Not of war that might come. Not of assassination attempts or political coups. Fear that he had lost the only person who had ever loved him without agenda or calculation. The only woman who had seen past the crown to the man beneath and chosen him anyway. And he had no idea how to get her back, or if she would even want to be found. 48 days after Lyssara vanished, Vaelor made a decision that shocked the empire. He called the council together and announced he was leaving. Not permanently, not abdication, but temporarily stepping away to search for his queen. The council erupted in protest. "Your Majesty, you cannot simply abandon the throne. The empire requires your presence. This is unprecedented." Vaelor let them argue for exactly 3 minutes. Then he stood and silence fell like an axe. "I am not abandoning the throne. Lord Mathis will serve as regent in my absence. The military remains under General Cade's command. The empire will not fall apart because I am gone for a few weeks. But Your Majesty." Enough. The word cut through the chamber like a blade. "I have made my decision. The council is dismissed." He left the war room without waiting for further protest. That night he packed a single bag. No royal clothing, no crown, no symbols of kingship. Just practical gear for traveling hard and fast. He told no one where he was going. Did not take guards or advisors or trackers. Just himself, a horse, and the mating bond pulling him north like a compass needle, finding true direction. He followed instinct rather than maps. Tracked the bond's faint pulse through forests thick with snow and across rivers frozen solid and over mountains that scraped the sky with peaks sharp enough to cut. He slept in caves and abandoned hunting lodges, ate whatever he could hunt or trap, grew a beard that made him look more like a vagabond than a king. And he searched, for weeks, through cold that bit deep into bone, through storms that turned the world white and shapeless, through doubt that whispered he would never find her, that she was gone forever, that he deserved to fail. But he kept moving. Because the alternative was returning to a palace that felt like a tomb and ruling an empire that meant nothing without her. The bond pulled him north and west, toward the coast where mountains met sea. Through territory so remote that villages were days apart and wolves hunted in packs that feared no man. Until finally, on a morning when frost covered the world in white silence and his breath hung in the air like ghosts, he crested a hill overlooking the silver coast. And there, built into the cliffside like it had grown from the stone itself, stood a cottage. Small, isolated, smoke rising from the chimney in a thin gray line. The bond surged, alive, close. Here. Vaelor's heart hammered so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. He dismounted and stood there for a long moment, staring at the cottage. Behind that door was the woman he had betrayed, the queen he had humiliated, the mate he had driven away. And he had no idea what to say to her, no words that could undo what he had done, no apology that would be enough. But he had come this far. He could not turn back now. He walked toward the cottage on foot, leading his horse. His hands shook, not from cold, from terror. Because this was not a battlefield where he knew the rules. This was not a throne room where he held power. This was facing the woman he had destroyed and asking for something he did not deserve and had no right to expect: forgiveness. He reached the cottage door and raised his hand to knock, then stopped, because through the frost-covered window he saw her. Lyssara stood near the fire, her back to the door, doing something at a wooden table, and her stomach was no longer hidden. The swell of pregnancy curved beneath her dress, obvious even from outside. His breath stopped. Their child. Growing while he betrayed her. Thriving while he chased desire over devotion. Alive despite everything he had done to destroy their future. Vaelor felt his knees weaken, his vision blurred. Not from snow or wind, from the crushing weight of seeing proof of what he had almost lost. Not just Lyssara, but their child. His heir. A future he had been too blind to value until it was gone. He stood there frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to do anything but stare at the woman who had been strong enough to leave and build a life without him. Then, as if sensing his presence, Lyssara turned. Her eyes met his through the frosted glass. For a long moment, neither moved. Then she walked to the door and opened it. She stood in the threshold, wrapped in wool and fur, her pale hair loose around her shoulders, her hand resting unconsciously on her swollen belly. She looked at him, not surprised, not angry, just tired, bone-deep tired. The kind of exhaustion that comes from crying every tear and making every hard choice, and finally reaching the other side of heartbreak where emotion no longer matters because survival matters more. And that hurt worse than rage ever could, because rage meant she still cared. Exhaustion meant she had moved past caring. She studied him for a moment, taking in his appearance, the beard, the travel-worn clothes, the hollow look in his eyes. Then she spoke, her voice flat and empty. "You found me." Vaelor's throat felt like it was full of broken glass. "I would have searched forever." She looked past him toward the sea, where waves crashed against rocks far below. Forever becomes valuable after something is lost. The words hit him like physical blows. He accepted them without defense. No excuses, no justifications, no royal authority to hide behind. Only truth. "I betrayed you." The words tasted like blood in his mouth. "I thought power excused hunger, thought loneliness justified weakness. I was wrong about everything." She studied him quietly, her expression unreadable. "And now?" Vaelor stepped closer, desperate and terrified in equal measure. "Now I know betrayal is just cowardice disguised as entitlement. Now I know I destroyed the only real thing I ever had." Silence filled the space between them. The wind picked up, carrying the salt smell of the sea. Then Lyssara spoke again, and her words dismantled him more thoroughly than any battle ever had. "I loved you even when you did not love me well, but I refuse to let our child learn that devotion means accepting disrespect." Vaelor felt something inside him shatter. The armor he had worn since childhood, the pride his father had taught him, the belief that kings did not need love to survive. All of it cracked and fell away, leaving only the raw truth underneath. He had been a fool, an arrogant, blind fool who had mistaken loneliness for wisdom and isolation for strength. He fell to his knees in the snow. Not ceremony, not performance, genuine, desperate repentance. "I cannot erase what I did, but I will spend the rest of my life becoming worthy of forgiveness." Lyssara said nothing, just looked down at him with those tired, knowing eyes. Then slowly, she reached down and guided his hand to her stomach. The baby moved beneath his palm. A flutter. A kick. Life. And Vaelor broke. Completely. Utterly. He pressed his forehead against her stomach and wept like he had not wept since he was a child. Great, shaking sobs that tore through him and left him gasping. All the years of holding everything in, all the loneliness he had pretended did not matter, all the love he had been too afraid to accept. It all came pouring out in the snow outside a cottage on the edge of the world. and Lyssara stood above him, one hand resting on his head. She did not tell him it was okay, did not offer easy comfort, just let him break. Because some things need to break before they can heal. After a long time, she spoke softly. "You should come inside before you freeze." Her voice carried no warmth, but no cruelty either. Just the practical concern of someone who has moved beyond anger into something colder and more permanent. Acceptance. Vaelor stood on shaking legs and followed her into the cottage. The door closed behind them, and outside, snow began to fall, like the sky itself was mourning what had been broken and might never be whole again. The cottage was smaller than any room in the palace, one main space with a stone fireplace, a wooden table scarred from use, 2 chairs that did not match, a narrow bed in the corner covered with quilts that looked handmade, shelves holding jars of preserved food and dried herbs, a window overlooking the sea. This was where his queen had been living, in exile, alone, pregnant, while he sat on a throne surrounded by luxury and lies. Vaelor stood just inside the door, dripping melted snow onto the wooden floor, feeling more out of place than he had ever felt in his life. Lyssara moved to the fireplace and added wood without looking at him. The flames caught and grew, throwing dancing shadows across the walls. She still had not invited him to sit, had not offered him anything, just let him stand there like a stranger who had knocked on the wrong door. And maybe that was exactly what he was now, a stranger, because the man she had married would never have knelt in the snow and wept, would never have ridden alone through winter storms searching for something he had thrown away, would never have admitted fault or begged for anything. That man had been a king who believed crowns excused cruelty. Vaelor did not know what he was now. He cleared his throat. "How long have you been here?" Lyssara straightened from the fire, brushing ash from her hands. "Since the night I left." Her voice remained flat, empty of everything except exhaustion. He looked around the cottage again, seeing details he had missed. Fresh water in a bucket by the door, firewood stacked neatly against the wall, clothes hanging on pegs, food stores organized on shelves. She had built a life here. Not survival, a life. "You have been alone this whole time?" She finally turned to look at him. Yes, one word. But it carried the weight of 2 months spent in isolation, pregnant and exiled, while he had sent search parties everywhere except the one place that mattered. Here, to the edge of the world where queens went when they stopped being queens and became just women trying to survive the wreckage of love. Vaelor felt shame crawl through his chest like insects. "I searched everywhere." "I know. How? Because I heard about it. Even here, news travels. Fishermen come through the village down the coast. They talk about the mad king who abandoned his throne to search for his missing queen." She said it without emotion, like she was recounting someone else's story, not theirs. Vaelor took a step toward her. She did not step back, but her body tensed, ready to move, ready to protect herself if needed. And that small moment of defensive instinct hurt more than anything else, because she had never feared him before, had never needed to guard herself in his presence. Now she did, because trust, once broken, leaves scars that show in the body even when the mind tries to forget. "I am not here to hurt you," he said quietly. Lyssara's laugh came out sharp and bitter. "You already did." "I know." "Then why are you here, Vaelor?" It was the first time she had said his name since he arrived. "Not your majesty, not my king, just his name, stripped of title and ceremony." And somehow that felt more intimate than anything they had shared in 3 years of marriage, because she was finally seeing him as just a man, flawed, broken, desperate. "I came to bring you home." The words hung between them. Lyssara stared at him for a long moment. Then she laughed again. Not bitter this time, just sad. So sad it made his chest ache. "This is my home now." She gestured around the small cottage. "This is where I chose to be, where I am safe, where our child will be born without learning that power matters more than people." Vaelor shook his head. "That is not what? Not true? You stood in front of the entire empire and declared desire over duty. You humiliated me in public. You chose her over me every single day for months." Her voice had risen, not shouting, but sharp. finally showing emotion, finally letting him see the wound he had carved into her. And I stayed silent. I endured it. I told myself it would pass, that you would see what you were doing, that love would be enough. She pressed a hand to her chest. But it was not enough. Because you did not want love, Vaelor. You wanted comfort without consequence, pleasure without responsibility. And I refused to keep sacrificing myself to give you that. The truth of her words hit him like stones, each one landing with brutal accuracy. You're right. She blinked, clearly not expecting that. What? You are right about all of it. I chose comfort over you, chose escape over honesty. I convinced myself that kings could take what they wanted and call it justified. I was wrong. He took another step closer. She held her ground this time. I was wrong about everything, Lyssara. Wrong about what makes a man strong. Wrong about what matters. Wrong about you. What does that mean? It means I thought you were quiet because you were weak. Patient because you had no fire. Gentle because you could not fight back. He met her eyes. But you were not weak. You were holding the entire marriage together while I tore it apart. And when you finally stopped holding it, I realized how much strength that took. How much I had been taking from you without ever giving anything back. Lyssara's hand moved unconsciously to her stomach, protective instinct older than words. And now you realize this? Now that I am gone? Now that there is a child? Yes. His honesty was brutal. No pretty words, no excuses dressed as explanations, just the ugly truth. Now, when it is almost too late, when I have already lost everything that mattered. She studied him in the firelight. Her expression was unreadable. The silence stretched long enough that Vaelor thought she would tell him to leave, to go back to his empire and his throne and his empty palace. That she was done. That some betrayals do not get second chances. Instead, she spoke quietly. Why her? The question landed like a blade between his ribs. Why Cerys? Lyssara nodded. Of all the people you could have chosen, why her? What did she give you that I did not? Vaelor wanted to lie, to make it sound less cruel than it was, but lies had destroyed them. Only truth had any chance of rebuilding. Nothing. She gave me nothing real. Then why? Because nothing was easier than something. He saw Lyssara's confusion and forced himself to continue. You loved me, truly, without agenda. And that terrified me. Why? Because love demands vulnerability. It demands opening parts of yourself that can be used against you. My father taught me that vulnerability kills kings, that caring too much makes you weak. He looked away, unable to hold her gaze. So I kept you at a distance, respected you, admired you, but never let you close enough to matter. And that emptiness became unbearable. So I filled it with something that demanded nothing. Cerys did not love me. She loved power. And that meant I could take what I wanted without ever having to give anything real in return. Understanding flickered in Lyssara's eyes. Not forgiveness, but comprehension. You used her to avoid me. Yes. And you destroyed our marriage in the process. Yes. The acknowledgement sat between them like a living thing. Heavy. Undeniable. True. Lyssara moved to one of the mismatched chairs and sat slowly, her pregnancy making the movement careful. Vaelor remained standing, waiting. She looked at him for a long time, her hands resting on her belly, where their child grew despite everything broken between them. I do not know if I can forgive you. Her voice was steady, honest, not cruel, just realistic. I do not know if what you did can be undone. You did not just betray me, Vaelor. You humiliated me, made me watch while the Empire laughed at my pain, made me invisible while you paraded your desire in public. I know, and I understand why you did it now. I understand the fear and the walls you built and the lies your father taught you. But understanding does not erase the damage. I know that too. She took a breath. So I will tell you what happens now. You can stay here tonight because the storm is coming and I will not send even you into that. Tomorrow, you leave. Vaelor felt panic rise in his throat. Lyssara, I am not finished. He went silent. She continued, her voice steady as stone. You leave tomorrow. You return to your empire, and you prove that you have changed, not with words, not with apologies, with action. You show me that you understand what you destroyed, that you have become someone worthy of trust. And maybe, when our child is born, I will consider letting you be part of that life." "How long?" She met his eyes. "As long as it takes." The answer was not cruel. It was honest. And honesty, Vaelor was learning, hurt more than any wound, because it left no room for negotiation or manipulation, only acceptance. He nodded slowly. All right. I will do what you ask. I will leave tomorrow. I will prove I have changed, however long it takes." Lyssara searched his face for deception, found only exhaustion and desperate sincerity. She stood carefully. "There is stew in the pot. You can eat, sleep by the fire. I will take the bed." She moved toward the corner of the cottage. Vaelor watched her go, his chest tight. "Lyssara." She paused but did not turn. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not telling me to never come back." She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but firm. "I did not say never. I said prove it. There is a difference. But do not mistake mercy for forgiveness. I am giving you a chance because of the child. Not because I have forgotten what you did." "I understand." She climbed into the bed and pulled the quilts around her, turning to face the wall. Conversation over. Vaelor stood in the center of the small cottage, surrounded by the life his wife had built without him, and felt the full weight of what he had lost. Not just a queen, not just a mate, but a partner who had loved him despite his walls and stayed loyal despite his distance, and only left when he gave her no other choice. And now he had to earn back what should never have been lost in the first place. He moved to the fire and sat on the floor, his back against the stone hearth. Outside, wind howled. Snow fell heavy and thick. The storm Lyssara had predicted arrived with fury. And inside the cottage, two people who had once been bound by ceremony and blood now existed as strangers sharing temporary shelter. Tomorrow he would leave. Tomorrow he would begin proving he could be different. But tonight he sat in the warmth of a fire his wife had built and listened to her breathe in the darkness, and tried to remember what it felt like to be just a man, not a king, not an alpha, just Vaelor, broken and alone, and desperate to become someone worthy of a second chance he had no right to expect. Morning came cold and gray. Vaelor woke to the smell of bread baking and tea brewing. Lyssara moved around the cottage with quiet efficiency, preparing breakfast like his presence changed nothing. He sat up, his back stiff from sleeping on the floor. She glanced at him once, then returned to her work. No good morning, no conversation, just acknowledgement that he still existed. He stood and moved to the window. The storm had passed. Snow covered everything in white so bright it hurt to look at. The path down to the coastal village would be difficult, but passable. No excuse to stay. Lyssara placed a bowl of porridge on the table, then a second bowl across from it, an invitation without words. Vaelor sat. They ate in silence. The food was simple, but good. Nothing like the elaborate meals served in the palace, but better somehow. Because it was real. Made by her hands, shared without pretense. When they finished, Lyssara collected the bowls and washed them in the bucket of water. Vaelor stood awkwardly, unsure what to do with himself. "You should go before the next storm arrives." Her voice was practical. Not cold, not warm, just stating fact. He nodded. "I will send supplies. Gold. Whatever you need. I do not want your gold." "Then what can I give you?" She turned to face him, one hand braced against the table. "Time. Give me time. And give me proof that you understand what was destroyed, that you have become someone different. How will I prove that if I cannot see you?" She was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she moved to a shelf and pulled down a wooden box. Inside was paper and ink. "Write to me, once a week. Tell me what you are changing. Show me who you are becoming, and I will decide if it is enough." "You want letters? I want honesty." Letters force you to think, to choose words carefully, to show rather than perform. She handed him paper and a sealed envelope. "This is my first letter to you. Read it after you leave. Respond if you want this chance." Vaelor took the envelope like it was made of glass. "I will write. We will see." She walked to the door and opened it. Cold air rushed in. The gesture was clear. Time to go. Vaelor pulled on his cloak and moved to the door. He paused in the threshold, inches from her, close enough to smell the soap she used, close enough to see the faint circles under her eyes from exhaustion and pregnancy, close enough to feel the mate bond pull tight between them, desperate to close the distance. But he did not touch her, did not reach out, did not try to claim any more than she was willing to give, because that was the difference between the man he had been and the man he needed to become. The old Vaelor took what he wanted. The new one would earn what mattered. "I will prove it," he said quietly. "However long it takes." Lyssara met his eyes. For the first time since he arrived, something flickered in her expression. Not forgiveness, not love, but possibility. The faintest, most fragile possibility that maybe, this could be rebuilt. "Go," she said softly. He nodded and stepped out into the snow. The door closed behind him. Vaelor stood there for a moment, staring at the wooden door that separated him from his wife. Then he turned and walked to where his horse waited. The journey back would take weeks, but he was not the same man who had left. That man had been a king who believed power excused everything. This man understood that some things matter more than crowns, and he would spend the rest of his life proving it. He mounted his horse and rode down the snowy path without looking back. Behind him, inside the cottage, Lyssara pressed her hand to the door, feeling the bond stretch as he moved away, feeling the ache of distance, but also feeling something else. Relief. Not because he was gone, but because for the first time in their marriage, he had listened, had accepted her terms, had not demanded or commanded or used his authority to override her will. He had simply accepted what she needed, and that was a beginning, small, fragile, but real. She moved to the bed and sat heavily, exhaustion pulling at her. One hand rested on her stomach. The baby kicked, strong, alive, oblivious to the storm of adult complications swirling around it. "Soon," she whispered, "soon you will be here, and I will make sure you grow up knowing that love without respect is not love at all." Outside, the wind picked up again. Another storm building, but Lyssara felt warm by the fire, safe in her small cottage, alone but not lonely, because loneliness and solitude are different things. Loneliness is emptiness that aches. Solitude is peace that heals. And she had chosen healing over endurance, dignity over crowns, herself over a marriage that demanded she disappear. Whether Vaelor could become someone worthy of changing, that remained to be seen. But for now, she had drawn the line, and he had not crossed it. That was enough. For now. Vaelor rode for 3 days before stopping in a village large enough to have an inn. He rented a room and built a fire. Then he pulled out the envelope Lyssara had given him. His hands shook as he broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in her elegant script. He read it slowly. Vaelor, I do not know if you will ever read this. I do not know if you will come looking for me or if you will let me go. Part of me hopes you will not find me. Part of me hopes you will. That is the cruelty of love. Even when it hurts, we want it to matter. If you are reading this, then you found me. You saw our child growing. You saw the life I built without you. I hope it taught you something. I hope it showed you what you threw away. You asked me once why I stayed silent for so long, why I endured the affair without confrontation. I will tell you now. Because I was afraid. Afraid that if I spoke, you would choose her, and as long as I stayed silent, I could pretend you might still choose me. That is the pathetic truth. I was a coward hiding behind patience. But when you stood in that hall and declared desire over duty, I realized something. Silence had not protected me. It had only delayed the inevitable. You had already chosen. Every night you went to her instead of me. Every council meeting where she sat closer than I did. Every lie you told yourself that it meant nothing. Those were choices. So I made mine. I chose to leave. To take our child somewhere you would never think to look. Somewhere I could remember who I was before I became your queen. Before I learned to make myself smaller to fit into your world. I am not small, Vaelor. I never was. You just never looked closely enough to see. If you want a chance to be part of this child's life, you must prove you have become someone different. Not through words, through action. Show me that you understand what was lost. Show me that you have learned that power without integrity is just cruelty dressed in ceremony. I do not want apologies. I want transformation. and only time will prove if you are capable of it. Write to me. Tell me what you are changing. Show me who you are becoming. And maybe, when our child is born, I will let you meet them. Maybe I will let you try again. Maybe. But there are no guarantees, Vaelor. Love is not something you conquer. It is something you earn. Every single day. And you stopped earning it the moment you chose comfort over commitment. Prove you can do better, or let me go completely. Those are your only options. Do not waste either of our time with half measures. Lyssara Vaelor read the letter 3 times. Each time it hit harder. Because every word was true. He had stopped earning her love the moment he stopped trying. Had convinced himself that the bond and the crown and the marriage ceremony meant she would stay regardless. But people are not possessions. And love is not a contract that binds forever without maintenance. It is a living thing that needs care and attention and honesty to survive. He had let it starve, and now he had to prove he understood how to feed it. He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began to write. Not excuses, not apologies, just truth, raw and honest and uncomfortable. Lyssara, I read your letter. You are right about everything. I did choose her, every time. I told myself it meant nothing, but choices define us, and I chose wrong, repeatedly. You asked me to show you I have changed. I do not know how to do that yet. I only know that I cannot go back to being who I was. That man nearly destroyed everything that mattered. I am back at the palace now. The empire is stable. The council continues without chaos. But none of it feels like victory. It feels hollow. Because I'm sitting on a throne that means nothing without you beside me. I exiled Ceres. That is not redemption. That is simply removing rot. She was using me for power the entire time. I was too arrogant to see it, too convinced that I was the one using her. But we were both feeding on emptiness and calling it connection. I understand now why you left. You were not running away. You were running toward yourself, toward the woman you were before I tried to make you fit into my limited understanding of what a queen should be. I'm sorry I made you feel small. I'm sorry I took your patience as permission to hurt you. I'm sorry I humiliated you publicly while you suffered privately. But I know apologies are not enough. You want transformation. I'm trying to understand what that means. Today I changed a law. Royal consorts can no longer be dismissed or humiliated without consequence. Emotional neglect in bonded marriages is now grounds for dissolution with full protection of the wronged party. It will not undo what I did to you, but perhaps it will protect others. Is that enough? I do not know. Probably not. But it is a beginning. I'm learning that being king means more than military conquest. It means setting an example. And I have been a terrible example. I will write again next week. I will keep writing until you tell me to stop or until you decide I have proven myself. However long that takes, I miss you. I miss who we could have been if I had not been so afraid of wanting you too much. Vaelor. He sealed the letter and sent it north with a trusted messenger who had orders to deliver it to the cottage on the Silver Coast. Then he returned to the work of ruling. But everything felt different now. Before, he had ruled with authority and distance. Now he questioned every decision through a new lens. What kind of example does this set? What kind of man does this make me? Would Lyssara respect this choice? It was exhausting and necessary. Because transformation is not comfortable. It is the slow, painful work of breaking old patterns and building new ones. And Vaelor had a lifetime of bad patterns to break. The letters became a ritual. Every week, Vaelor wrote. He told Lyssara about the changes he was making in the empire. New protections for bonded mates, councils that included female advisors with actual authority, laws that held powerful men accountable for private cruelty. But he also told her about the internal work, the moments when he wanted to fall back into old habits and had to stop himself, the times when anger rose and he had to sit with it instead of lashing out, the slow, difficult process of learning to be vulnerable without seeing it as weakness. Some weeks he wrote about failure, about moments when he had reverted to commanding rather than listening, about advisors who tested his patience and how he had handled it poorly. He did not hide his mistakes, because Lyssara had asked for honesty. And honesty meant showing the ugly parts too. Her responses came less frequently. Sometimes weeks would pass before he received a letter back. But when they came, they were thoughtful. She acknowledged his efforts, pointed out where he was still missing the mark, asked questions that forced him to think deeper. She did not make it easy, and he did not expect her to, because trust, once shattered, rebuilds slowly. One small action at a time, one moment of integrity at a time, one choice to be better at a time. There were no shortcuts, no grand gestures that could erase months of betrayal, just the slow accumulation of proof that change was real. Months passed. Winter turned to early spring. The empire stabilized under his reformed leadership. Northern houses stopped threatening rebellion. Allies returned to negotiations. Enemies watched warily but did not attack. And Vaelor wrote, every week, without fail, telling his wife about the man he was becoming, hoping it would be enough, knowing it might not be, but trying anyway, because that was what love required. Not certainty, just commitment to keep trying even when the outcome was unknown. Then one morning, a letter arrived that changed everything. Vaelor broke the seal with shaking hands. Vaelor, our daughter was born 3 days ago. He stopped breathing. A daughter. They had a daughter. His vision blurred as he kept reading. She is healthy, strong, beautiful in the way newborns are beautiful, which is to say strange and perfect and terrifying all at once. I named her Lyra. It means light in the old language, because she is light in the darkness, proof that something good can grow even in the wreckage of broken things. I'm writing to tell you that you may come see her, if you still want to, if you have truly changed. But there are conditions. You come as a man, not a king. Leave your crown at the palace. Leave your guards and your authority and your royal expectations. You come as Vaelor, as a father meeting his daughter, not as an alpha claiming his heir. And you stay only as long as I allow. If I tell you to leave, you leave, without argument, without using power or the bond to manipulate. This is not reconciliation. This is not forgiveness. This is me allowing you the chance to know your child. What happens beyond that depends entirely on whether you have become someone worthy of more. If you agree to these terms, come within the week. If not, do not come at all. Lyssara Vaelor read the letter 4 times. A daughter. He had a daughter. And Lyssara was allowing him to meet her. Not commanding, not forgiving, just allowing, on her terms. And every cell in his body screamed to run to the cottage immediately, to see his child, to hold his mate, to reclaim what was his. But that was the old thinking, the pattern he was trying to break. She was not his to reclaim. She was a person who had set boundaries, and he would respect them, or lose everything. Again. He called for the captain of his guard. Prepare a horse. I leave in the morning. The captain hesitated. Your Majesty, should we prepare an escort? No, but the roads. No escort, no guards, no royal procession. I ride alone. But that is an order. The captain bowed stiffly, clearly unhappy but obedient. Vaelor spent the rest of the day preparing. He drafted orders for the council in his absence, left instructions for regent authority, wrote letters to allies explaining he would be gone, but the empire remained stable. Then he removed his crown and placed it on the throne. Symbolic. Intentional. When he returned, he would wear it again. But for now, he was just a man riding north to meet his daughter. And maybe, to prove to his wife that he had finally learned what mattered. Not power, not conquest, not dominance, but the slow, difficult, unglamorous work of becoming someone worthy of the love he had thrown away. He left at dawn, alone. The ride took 4 days, and every mile the bond pulled tighter, drawing him home, not to a palace, but to a cottage on the edge of the world, where his family waited, and where the hardest work of his life would truly begin. Vaelor reached the cottage on the 4th day just as evening light turned the sea golden. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin line. The sight made his chest tight. Home. Not the palace with its 1,000 rooms and gilded ceilings. This small stone structure where his wife and daughter lived without him. He dismounted and stood there for a moment, gathering courage he did not know he needed. He had faced armies without fear, stared down assassins without flinching, ruled an empire with absolute authority. But walking to that door terrified him more than any battlefield, because this was not about power. This was about being allowed into a life he had nearly destroyed. He knocked. 3 soft taps. Silence. Then footsteps. The door opened. Lyssara stood there holding a bundle wrapped in soft wool. She looked exhausted, beautiful in the way new mothers are beautiful, which is to say worn down to something essential and fierce. Her eyes met his, still guarded, still cautious, but something had softened since winter. "You came. I said I would." She studied him for a long moment, looking for signs of the man who had left months ago versus the man who stood before her now. Whatever she saw must have been enough because she stepped aside. "Come in." Quietly. She just fell asleep. Vaelor entered the cottage, his movements careful and deliberate. Everything looked the same as it had in winter. Same table, same fireplace, same narrow bed, but different too, because now there were baby clothes drying near the fire. A cradle made of polished wood in the corner, the smell of milk and new life mixing with smoke and tea. A family lived here now, not just a woman in exile. Lyssara moved to the cradle and gently placed the bundle inside. Then she turned to face Vaelor, her arms crossing over her chest in a gesture that was both defensive and exhausted. "You can look at her, but do not wake her. I just got her down, and if she wakes now, I will lose my mind." There was no humor in her voice, just the raw honesty of someone who had been up for days dealing with a newborn alone. Vaelor approached the cradle like it might explode. He looked down, and his entire world stopped. She was tiny, impossibly small, a scrap of humanity wrapped in wool with a face like a flower that had not fully opened yet. Dark hair. His hair. But her features were Lyssara's, delicate, perfect, terrifying in their fragility. He had seen men die on battlefields and felt nothing, had ordered executions without losing sleep, had witnessed violence and cruelty and suffering without blinking. But looking at his daughter sleeping in a cradle her mother had probably built by hand, Vaelor felt something crack open inside him that he had kept sealed for decades. Love. Not the abstract concept, not the poetic idea, but the visceral, overwhelming, devastating reality of loving something so completely that its existence became more important than his own. "She is beautiful," he whispered. Lyssara's expression softened just slightly. "She is also loud and demanding, and has your stubbornness already." Despite everything, Vaelor almost smiled. "Almost? What is she like?" Lyssara moved to the table and sat heavily, the exhaustion of new motherhood written in every line of her body. "She is 3 days old, Vaelor. I have no idea what she is like. I only know she eats every 2 hours, cries when she is wet, and sometimes stares at me like she is judging my entire existence." This time he did smile. Small, careful, but real. "Sounds like she takes after you." Lyssara looked at him sharply. Then her lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Careful, Vaelor. I am too tired to fight, but not too tired to throw you out." He raised his hands in surrender. "No fighting. I promised." They sat in silence for a moment. The fire crackled. The baby made a soft sound in her sleep, but did not wake. Outside, wind moved through the trees like breathing. Vaelor wanted to say 1,000 things. Wanted to thank her for letting him come. Wanted to apologize again for everything. Wanted to ask if she had thought about coming home. But he said none of it. Because Lyssara had not invited conversation. She had invited him to meet his daughter, nothing more. So he sat quietly and watched the firelight dance across the walls, and tried to memorize every detail of this moment, because tomorrow she might tell him to leave, and he would have to go. Those were the terms. Finally, Lyssara spoke. "You can stay tonight. Sleep by the fire like before. Tomorrow, we will talk about what happens next." Her voice was steady but firm. Not an invitation to rebuild, just permission to exist in the same space for one night. Vaelor nodded. "Thank you. Do not thank me yet. You have not heard the conditions." "What conditions?" "Tomorrow. I am too exhausted to have this conversation tonight. Just know that nothing has been decided. You meeting her does not mean you have earned anything beyond this moment." "I understand." "Do you?" "Because I need you to truly understand, Vaelor. This is not me taking you back. This is not reconciliation. This is me allowing you limited access to your daughter while I decide if you have changed enough to deserve more." "I understand," he repeated quietly. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. There is stew in the pot. Help yourself. I am going to sleep while I can." She stood and moved to the bed, lying down fully clothed, and within minutes her breathing deepened into sleep. The sleep of someone who had been running on nothing but will and necessity for days. Vaelor sat by the fire and watched his wife and daughter sleep. Two people who had survived without him, who had built a life in his absence, who did not need him to exist. And that realization was both devastating and clarifying, because for the first time in his life, Vaelor understood what it meant to want something he could not simply take, could not command, could not conquer. He could only earn it. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of proving he had become someone different, and there were no guarantees it would be enough. He pulled out the latest letter he had written, but not yet sent, and read it by firelight. Words about changes he had made, laws he had reformed, moments when he had chosen differently than the old version of himself would have. It all felt hollow now, because real change was not about policies and public gestures. It was about sitting quietly by a fire in a cottage on the edge of the world and accepting that you might never get back what you destroyed, and trying anyway. Not because success was guaranteed, but because the alternative was giving up, and giving up meant losing them forever. Vaelor fed the letter to the flames and watched it burn. He did not need to send it. She already knew what he was trying to become. Now he just had to keep being it, even if it was never enough. Morning came with the sound of the baby crying. Vaelor woke immediately, years of military training making him alert in seconds. Lyssara was already up, lifting Lyra from the cradle and moving to the chair by the fire. She sat and began feeding the baby with the kind of exhausted efficiency that spoke of days without real rest. Vaelor sat up, uncertain what to do. "Can I help?" Lyssara glanced at him. "Unless you can produce milk? No." He almost laughed at the dry honesty. Almost. "I could make tea, or food, or something. Tea would be good." He stood and moved to the small kitchen area, grateful for something to do with his hands. He found the kettle and filled it with water from the bucket, then hung it over the fire to boil. Behind him, Lyssara hummed softly to Lyra, an old northern melody their mothers had probably sung to them. The domesticity of the moment was surreal. An alpha king making tea in a cottage while his queen fed their child. No servants, no ceremony, just two people existing in the same space, trying to navigate the wreckage between them. The water boiled. Vaelor made tea the way he remembered Lyssara liked it. Strong. No honey. He brought it to her carefully. She took it with one hand, still holding Lyra with the other. "Thank you." They sat in silence while she finished feeding the baby. When Lyra was done, Lyssara stood and walked to Vaelor. "Hold out your arms." He froze. "What?" "You wanted to meet her. Hold her." "I do not know how." "You will learn. Bend your arms like you are holding something fragile. Support her head. Do not drop her." She placed Lyra in his arms before he could protest further. The weight was nothing, barely more than the sword he carried into battle. But the responsibility felt infinite. This tiny person was his daughter, his blood, his legacy. And she was staring up at him with dark eyes that did not yet focus properly but seemed to see straight through him anyway. "Hello, Lyra," he whispered. The baby made a sound, not quite a cry, just acknowledgement. Vaelor felt his throat tighten. He had held the throne of an empire, commanded armies, ruled with absolute authority, but holding his daughter made him feel more powerful and more helpless than anything he had ever done, because this was real in a way crowns and conquests never were. This was a person who would grow up and have thoughts and feelings and a life that would be shaped in part by him, by whether he was present or absent, by whether he loved her mother well or poorly, by whether he became someone worthy of her respect or just another father who failed. The weight of that responsibility was crushing and clarifying. Lyssara watched him hold Lyra, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke quietly. "Now you understand." "Understand what?" "Why I left. Why I refused to settle for half measures. Because she will watch us. Will learn from how we treat each other. And I refuse to teach my daughter that love means enduring disrespect. Vaelor looked up from Lyra to meet Lysara's eyes. I understand. I swear I understand. We will see. She took Lyra back gently and placed her in the cradle. Then she turned to face Vaelor fully, her arms crossed. Sit. We need to talk about terms. He sat. She remained standing. A position of power. Deliberate. If you want to be part of Lyra's life, you will do exactly what I say. No negotiation, no royal authority, no using the bond to manipulate. You follow my rules or you leave and do not come back. Do you agree? Yes. First rule. You do not take her to the palace, not now, not for years. She grows up here where I can protect her from the poison of that place. Vaelor's chest tightened. The heir to the empire could not grow up hidden on the coast, but he had promised to accept her terms. Agreed. Second rule. You visit only when I allow it. If I say leave, you leave. If I say do not come, you do not come. My word is final. Agreed. Third rule. You do not get to make decisions about her without me. Not her name, not her future, not anything. I am her mother. You are a guest in her life until you prove you deserve more. The words stung, but they were fair. Agreed. Lyssara studied him, looking for resistance, finding none. Last rule. You prove to me that you have changed, not with words, with consistent action over time. And if at any point I decide you have not changed enough, I will cut you out of both our lives completely. Do you understand? Yes. Say it back to me. If you decide I have not changed enough, you will cut me out completely, and I will accept that. Lyssara nodded slowly. Good. Then you can stay for 3 days. After that, you return to the Empire. You come back in a month. We repeat. And eventually, maybe, we will discuss something more permanent. But that is months away. Maybe years. Are we clear? Crystal clear. She sat finally, her shoulders sagging with exhaustion. I am not trying to punish you, Vaelor. I am trying to protect my daughter. And myself. I cannot go back to who I was. The woman who stayed silent while you destroyed us both. That woman is gone. Good, he said quietly. She deserved better than I gave her. Lyssara's expression flickered. Surprise. Then something softer. Yes, she did. They sat in silence for a long moment. Then Lyra began to cry again. Lyssara sighed. 2 hours exactly, like clockwork. She stood and moved to the cradle. Vaelor watched her lift their daughter and begin the cycle again. Feeding, comforting, protecting. All the things she had been doing alone for 3 days. For months before that. And he understood with brutal clarity that this was what he had thrown away. Not a political alliance, not a crown, but partnership with a woman who would have walked through fire for him if he had just let her stand beside him instead of behind him. He had been a fool, and now he was paying for it, not with his kingdom, but with years of distance from the family he had almost lost forever. It was a fair price, almost too generous, and he would spend every remaining day of his life trying to be worth it. The 3 days passed too quickly. Vaelor helped where he could, fetched water, chopped wood, made meals while Lyssara fed Lyra. They did not talk much beyond necessity, but something shifted in the silence. Not forgiveness, not trust rebuilt, but the beginning of something new. A tentative ceasefire between two people learning to exist in the same space without the weight of past betrayal crushing every interaction. On the morning of the 4th day, Vaelor prepared to leave. He stood by the door, his pack ready, his horse saddled outside. Lyssara held Lyra, standing near the fire. 1 month, she said. Not before. 1 month, he agreed. And Vaelor, yes? Do not disappoint me. I have very little trust left to give. I will not. He wanted to say more, wanted to tell her he loved her, that he had never stopped, that every day without her felt like suffocation, but words were cheap. He had already said too many. Now he just had to live differently. He nodded once and left. The door closed behind him. He mounted his horse and rode away from the cottage, the bond pulling tight with every step. 1 month. He could survive 1 month. He had to. Because the alternative was losing them forever. And that was not an option. Vaelor returned to the palace with renewed purpose. The council met him with relief and questions. He answered neither. just resumed his duties with a focus that bordered on obsessive. He continued reforming laws, continued meeting with female advisors, continued pushing the empire towards something better than it had been. But he also began preparing, quietly, carefully, for a future where his family might return. He had chambers renovated, made them softer, less fortress, more home. He established funds for education and protection of mothers and children, policies that would benefit Lyssara and Elira even if they never came back. And he wrote, not to Lyssara, she had not asked for letters, but to Elira. Pages and pages he sealed and saved, stories about the empire she would inherit, apologies for not being there, promises about the man he was trying to become. He did not know if she would ever read them, but he wrote them anyway, because a father should leave something for his daughter, beyond regret. 3 weeks passed. Then something happened that shattered everything. A messenger arrived at the palace near midnight, urgent, pale, terrified. Vaelor met him in the war room, dread already coiling in his gut. Speak. The messenger swallowed hard. Your Majesty, there has been an attack. Where? The Silver Coast. A cottage. We received word from the village. Fire. And Vaelor's blood turned to ice. And what? The queen. And the child. They are gone. The words did not make sense. Gone how? Missing, Your Majesty. The cottage burned. No bodies were found, but there was blood and signs of struggle. Everything stopped. The room, the world, his heart. Vaelor stood frozen, his mind refusing to process what he had just heard. Lyssara, Elira, gone. He reached for the bond. It was there, faint, but alive. She lived, somewhere. But where? Who did this? His voice came out dead, flat. We do not know. The village found the cottage burning at dawn. By the time they put out the flames, there was nothing left but ash and blood. How much blood? Enough to know someone was hurt. Vaelor's hands clenched into fists so tight, his knuckles cracked. Assemble every tracker, every scout, every resource we have. Find them. Yes, Your Majesty. Now. The messenger fled. Vaelor stood alone in the war room, staring at maps that suddenly meant nothing. His wife and daughter were missing, possibly hurt, definitely taken. And he had no idea who or why or where. The bond pulled, north and east, moving. They were being taken somewhere, fast. He turned and ran from the war room, shouted orders to guards as he passed. Prepare my horse, full battle gear, fastest riders. We leave in 10 minutes. Your Majesty, the council? Damn the council. My family has been taken. We ride. Now. He reached his chambers and armed himself with brutal efficiency. Sword, knives, armor. Everything he needed to kill whoever had done this. Because Vaelor had spent months learning to be gentle, learning patience, learning to value love over power. But some things do not require patience. Some things require violence. And whoever had taken his mate and child was about to learn what happened when an alpha king stopped trying to be civilized. He met his riders in the courtyard, 20 of his best warriors, armed, mounted, ready. We ride until we find them. No rest. No mercy. Understood? Yes, Your Majesty. They rode out of the palace at a pace that would kill horses within days. Vaelor did not care. He would walk if he had to, crawl if necessary, but he would find them. The bond pulled him northeast, through forests, across rivers, over terrain that grew rougher with every mile. They rode through the night and into the next day, stopping only to change horses at military outposts. Vaelor did not eat, did not sleep, just followed the bond like a man possessed, because he was possessed by rage, by fear, by the devastating knowledge that he had let them live unprotected, had left them vulnerable while he played at Reformation in a palace. This was his fault, all of it. On the second day, they found the first clue. A burned wagon on a mountain pass. Dead bodies scattered around it. Mercenaries by the look of them. But killed by someone skilled. Vaelor dismounted and examined the scene. The mercenaries had been transporting someone. The wagon had restraints inside, chains. His stomach turned. One of his trackers knelt beside marks in the dirt. Your Majesty, these tracks, they are fresh, maybe 6 hours old. moving fast toward the eastern border. The eastern border. Enemy territory. This was not random. This was planned. An act of war disguised as kidnapping. Vaelor's rage crystallized into something cold and deadly. Someone had taken his family. Someone would die for it. He remounted. Faster. We are close. They rode harder. The landscape changed. Mountains gave way to badlands. Civilization disappeared. This was the kind of place where laws did not reach, where violence was currency and mercy was weakness. Exactly the kind of place someone would take a queen and royal heir if they wanted leverage or revenge. On the third day, they found the camp, hidden in a canyon, guarded, but sloppy. Whoever had taken Lyssara and Lyra was confident they would not be found this quickly. They were wrong. Vaelor signaled his men to surround the camp, silent, efficient, lethal. Then he walked into the camp alone. Not stealth, not strategy, just raw authority and rage. Guards scrambled, weapons raised. "Who the hell are you?" Vaelor's voice came out like death itself. "I am Alpha King Vaelor Draven. You have something that belongs to me. Return it now and die quickly. Refuse and I will make your death last days." The guards hesitated. Then a voice called from inside the largest tent. "Let him in." Vaelor pushed past the guards and entered the tent. Inside, a man sat behind a makeshift table. Older, scarred, familiar. Vaelor's blood went cold. Lord Castor, a northern lord who had opposed the marriage 3 years ago, who had called it a betrayal of northern values, who had been exiled for sedition. Castor smiled. "Hello, Your Majesty. Looking for something? Where are they?" "Safe. For now, if you have hurt them, you will what? Kill me? I am already dead, exiled, stripped of title. You took everything from me when you married that girl and pretended it was alliance instead of conquest. This is about revenge?" Castor stood. "This is about justice. You used the northern houses, took our daughter and turned her into decoration for your throne. Then you humiliated her publicly, made her a joke, and you think there would be no consequences? She left by choice, because you gave her no other option, and now she will return to her people, where she belongs." Vaelor's hands clenched. "She belongs nowhere you can decide." Castor moved closer. "Here is what will happen, Your Majesty. You will dissolve your marriage, publicly. You will return her and the child to northern custody, and you will pay reparations for 3 years of dishonor. Or I kill the baby, right now, while you watch." The words hung in the air like poison. Vaelor went very still, the kind of stillness that precedes storms. "You will not." "Try me." Castor gestured to the back of the tent. A woman emerged holding Lyra. The baby was crying. Lyssara was nowhere in sight. Vaelor's world narrowed to his daughter. Tiny, helpless, held by an enemy who had just threatened to kill her. Every instinct screamed at him to attack, to rip Castor apart with his bare hands. But the woman holding Lyra had a knife, and she stood too far away for him to reach before she could hurt his child. This was the twist. The moment when power meant nothing, when all his strength and authority and military genius could not save what mattered most. Because Castor had found the one leverage that worked, not territory, not alliance, but love. Vaelor forced his voice to stay calm. "What do you want?" "I told you. Dissolve the marriage, return them to the north, pay reparations. And if I do that, you let them go?" Castor smiled. "Eventually. Not good enough. Then watch your daughter die." The woman with the knife moved it closer to Lyra. Vaelor's vision went red, but he could not move, could not attack, could not do anything except stand there and feel utterly helpless for the first time in his life. This was what Lyssara had felt. Helpless. Trapped, powerless while someone with authority destroyed everything around her. And now he understood, truly understood, what it felt like to love something so much that losing it would break you completely. He met Castor's eyes. "Let me see Lyssara. Let me know she is alive. Then we negotiate." Castor considered, then nodded. "Bring her." A moment later, Lyssara was dragged into the tent. She was hurt, blood on her temple, bruises on her arms, but alive. Her eyes met Vaelor's, and in them he saw something that shattered him. Not relief, not hope, resignation. She had known this would happen, had known that building a life away from the palace would not protect her, had known that eventually the Empire's enemies would find her, use her, hurt her, and there was nothing Vaelor could do to stop it. Because this was the cost of power. The people you love become weapons used against you. Lyssara spoke, her voice hoarse. Do not give him anything, Vaelor. Do not let him win. Castor backhanded her. She fell. Vaelor moved without thinking. Fast, lethal. He crossed the space between them in a heartbeat, and his fist connected with Castor's jaw with enough force to drop a horse. The older man went down hard, but the woman with the knife pressed it to Elira's throat. Stop, or she dies. Vaelor froze. Castor stood slowly, blood running from his mouth. That was a mistake, Your Majesty. He pulled a knife from his belt and pressed it to Lyssara's throat. Now, you have a choice. Agree to my terms, or watch them both die. Right here, right now. Vaelor looked at Lyssara, at Elira, at the two people who mattered more than any crown or empire or legacy, and he made a decision that would change everything. He dropped to his knees, not in surrender, in bargaining position. Do not hurt them, please. I will give you anything. Gold, territory, my own life. Just let them go. Castor smiled. Finally. The Alpha King begs. He moved the knife away from Lyssara's throat. Here's the new deal. You sign a treaty giving northern houses independence, you pay triple reparations, and you never contact either of them again. Vaelor's world stopped. Never see them again. Never hold his daughter. Never try to rebuild what he had destroyed with Lyssara. Complete separation. Forever. That was the price. And looking at Elira crying in the arms of someone who wanted to hurt her, looking at Lyssara bleeding on the ground, Vaelor understood something profound. Love is not about possession. It is about protection, even when protection means letting go. He met Lyssara's eyes. She shook her head. Do not do this. But he had already decided. I agree. Let them go, and I will sign whatever you want. Castor's smile widened. Smart man. He gestured to the woman. She lowered the knife from Elira. Vaelor felt relief so intense it made him dizzy. They would live. That was all that mattered. The rest he could survive. But then Lyssara spoke, and her words changed everything one final time. He is lying. Everyone turned to look at her. She pushed herself up, blood running down her face, and stared at Castor with eyes full of rage. He is lying, Vaelor. The moment you sign that treaty, he will kill us anyway, because we are witnesses, because I know he has been planning rebellion for years, because letting us live means we can testify to treason. Castor's expression went cold. Shut up. No, I am done being silent. She looked at Vaelor. Do not trust him. Do not give him anything. And for the love of everything, do not sacrifice yourself for us. We survived without you before. We will survive again. Castor raised the knife. Vaelor roared, a sound that was not human, pure alpha, pure rage, pure protective instinct that had been suppressed by months of trying to be gentle. And in that moment, all his carefully built patience shattered. He was done negotiating, done begging, done playing by civilized rules. His men heard the roar. They attacked. The camp erupted into violence. Vaelor moved like death incarnate. He ripped the knife from Castor's hand and drove it through the older man's throat before he could react. Blood sprayed. Castor dropped, dead before he hit the ground. The woman holding Elira screamed and ran. Vaelor caught her in 3 strides, took his daughter gently from her arms, then broke the woman's neck with his free hand. No hesitation, no mercy, just brutal efficiency. His men cleared the camp in minutes. Every enemy dead, every threat eliminated. When the violence ended, Vaelor stood in the center of carnage, holding his daughter against his chest. Elira was screaming, terrified, but alive. Lyssara pushed herself up and stumbled toward them. Vaelor caught her with one arm, still holding Elira with the other. They stood there, a family, covered in blood and ash, surrounded by death, but alive, together. And Vaelor understood with brutal clarity that everything had changed. He could not keep them safe in a cottage on the coast, could not protect them through distance, could not separate love from the reality of what he was. An alpha king whose enemies would always hunt what he loved. The only way to protect them was to bring them into the fortress, to give them every resource and guard and weapon the Empire possessed, to stop pretending he could be just a man visiting his family once a month. He was a king, and they were his queen and heir, and the Empire would damn well protect them or burn trying. He looked at Lyssara, his voice rough. "Come home." She stared at him, exhausted and hurt and still angry, but also pragmatic, because she had just been kidnapped and nearly killed. And she knew he was right. Distance had not protected them. It had made them vulnerable. She looked at Lyssara crying in Vaelor's arms, then back at him. "On my terms." He nodded without hesitation. "Anything." "I mean it, Vaelor. This does not fix what you did. This does not erase months of pain. You bring us to the palace, but I am not your decoration. I am your equal, in everything. Yes. And if you ever betray me again, I will not run. I will burn your empire to the ground and take Lyssara somewhere you will never find us. Do you understand?" He met her eyes, and saw not the gentle queen who had endured in silence, but a woman who had been forged in fire and come out stronger, fiercer, dangerous in ways he was only beginning to understand. "I understand, and I swear on Lyssara's life, I will never give you reason to leave again." Lyssara studied him for a long moment, then nodded once, then let us go home. Vaelor adjusted Lyssara in his arms and helped Lyssara onto his horse. Then he mounted behind them. His family, bloodied, exhausted, but together. They rode toward the Empire as dawn broke across the Badlands, and Vaelor knew that the real work was just beginning. Not conquest, not reformation, but the daily, unglamorous, difficult work of being worthy of the woman who had given him another chance, and the daughter who would watch every moment to see what kind of man he chose to be, the kind who took power for granted, or the kind who understood that real strength is protecting what you love, even when it costs everything you thought mattered. The ride back to the Empire took 4 days but felt like centuries. Vaelor held Lyssara and Lyssara close as they moved through terrain that grew less hostile with every mile. His warriors rode in tight formation around them, weapons ready, eyes scanning for threats that might still be hunting them, because Castor had not been working alone. A lord does not plan rebellion in isolation. He builds networks, allies, other northern houses who believed the marriage had been an insult rather than alliance. And those allies would learn soon enough that their leader was dead. When they did, they would either scatter or attack. Vaelor was betting on attack. Men like Castor attracted followers who valued revenge over survival, who would see his death as justification for war rather than warning to retreat. The Empire was about to face rebellion, and Vaelor was bringing his family directly into the center of it. Lyssara had not spoken much since they left the Badlands. She held Lyssara against her chest, wrapped in Vaelor's cloak, her eyes distant and exhausted. The wound on her temple had stopped bleeding but left dried blood in her pale hair. Bruises darkened on her arms where she had been grabbed and dragged. She looked like someone who had survived battle, which she had. On the second day, they stopped to rest at a military outpost. A medic examined Lyssara despite her protests, cleaned her wounds, wrapped her ribs where bruising suggested she had been kicked, applied salve to cuts and scrapes that mapped the violence she had survived. Through it all, she remained silent, stoic, refusing to show pain even though Vaelor could see it in the tension of her jaw and the way her hands clenched when the medic pressed too hard on injured flesh. When it was done, she took Lyssara back from Vaelor without meeting his eyes. "Thank you. I need to feed her now." She walked away toward the private quarters. Vaelor watched her go, his chest tight. Captain Torvan approached, his scarred face grim. "Your Majesty, scouts report movement in the northern territories, multiple houses mobilizing. They know about Castor. How many? At least 5 houses, maybe more." 5 northern houses meant thousands of warriors. Not enough to take the Empire in open war, but enough to cause chaos. Enough to threaten the capital if they moved fast and struck before defenses could fully mobilize. "They will march on Vareth." Torvan nodded. "Our intelligence suggests they plan to attack within a week, before word of Castor's failure spreads." Vaelor's jaw tightened. "Send word ahead. Full mobilization. Every garrison between here and the capital. I want walls reinforced, supplies stockpiled, and every citizen armed. If the northern houses want war, we will give them annihilation." Torvin hesitated. Your Majesty, the council will want to negotiate. The council can offer whatever they want after I have crushed every house that participated in kidnapping my family. Vaelor's voice was ice. This is not politics, Torvin. This is not territory dispute. They took my mate and child, threatened to kill them. And you think I am going to negotiate? The captain bowed quickly. No, Your Majesty. I will send the orders immediately. Vaelor stood alone in the courtyard, staring north toward the territories that had once been allies and were now enemies. The northern houses wanted war. They were about to discover why Dravenmore had never fallen. Not because of superior numbers or better tactics, but because when you threaten a Wolf King's family, you do not fight an army. You fight something much worse, a man who has nothing left to lose. Bam! They reached the palace on the fourth day as evening fell. The capital spread below them, massive and ancient and fortified like the beating heart of something alive and dangerous. Lyssara stared at it from the hillside overlook, her expression unreadable. 3 months ago, she had fled this place in secret, desperate to escape. Now she was returning with guards and ceremony and the full weight of the Empire watching. She looked at Vaelor. I know what you are thinking, he said. Do you? You are thinking that returning here means going back to who you were before. Invisible, disrespected, trapped. Am I wrong? Yes. Because you are not returning as that woman. You are returning as the queen who survived kidnapping and still protected our daughter. The Empire will see you differently now, because I will make sure they do. Words, Vaelor. You are good at those. He flinched but did not look away. Then watch my actions. They descended toward the capital in silence. The palace gates opened as they approached. Guards lined the courtyard in full ceremonial armor. The council stood on the steps, faces ranging from relief to barely concealed frustration. Vaelor dismounted and helped Lyssara down, then took Alira carefully from her arms. He walked toward the council with Lyssara beside him. Not behind. Beside. The council bowed. Your Majesty, welcome home. Vaelor stopped in front of them. The Queen and Princess will be given the royal chambers in the East Wing, full guard. No visitors without explicit permission from either myself or Queen Lyssara. Is that clear? The council exchanged glances. Your Majesty, perhaps the council chambers would be more appropriate. I did not ask for discussion. I gave an order. The threat was clear. No one spoke. They entered the palace through corridors Lyssara had walked hundreds of times, but now felt foreign after months away. They reached the East Wing chambers. Vaelor had spent weeks preparing them, larger than their old rooms, warmer, with windows overlooking gardens instead of cold stone walls. A nursery connected to the main chamber, already furnished with everything a child might need. Lyssara walked through slowly, taking it in. You did this? Yes. After I saw Alira the first time, I started preparing for the possibility you might come home, even if it took years. She was quiet for a long moment. This does not fix anything. I know, this does not mean I forgive you. I know that too. She took Alira from him gently. Now leave. I need to feed her and sleep and not think about politics or war or any of the chaos you are about to unleash. He wanted to stay, wanted to help, wanted to be part of the small domestic moments he had missed. But she had drawn the boundary, and he would respect it. He nodded and left, closing the door softly behind him. Quack. The war came faster than expected. 3 days after returning to the palace, scouts reported northern armies marching south. 5 separate houses, each bringing their full strength. Warriors numbering in the thousands, moving fast, coordinated. This was not random rebellion. This was organized war. The council convened an emergency session. Vaelor stood at the head of the war table, studying maps that showed enemy positions and projected movements. General Cade pointed to key locations. They will converge here, 3 days north of the capital. If they combine forces before we engage, they will outnumber our forward positions 2 to 1. Then we do not let them combine. We hit them separately. Fast strikes on each force before they can merge. The general considered. It is risky. We would need to split our own forces. Vaelor met his eyes. Do you trust your commanders? With my life. Then trust them with this. We take the battle to them and show every house in the Empire what happens when you threaten the throne. Lord Mathis cleared his throat nervously. Your Majesty, Perhaps we should consider negotiation. They kidnapped my family. They threatened to kill my daughter. What terms would you suggest I offer them? Silence. We go to war. We crush every house that raised arms against us. Then a voice spoke from the doorway. This is not about justice, Vaelor. This is about rage. And rage makes you the same as them. Lyssara stood there, holding a lyra. Vaelor had not known she was there. They took you, hurt you, threatened our daughter. You expect me to respond with patience? I expect you to respond with wisdom. She moved closer, shifting a lyra in her arms. I understand your anger. I feel it too. But slaughtering thousands of people will not protect us. It will just create more enemies, more people who see you as a tyrant who rules through fear instead of strength. What would you have me do? Defend the empire. Win the war, but do it as a king who understands the difference between necessary force and unnecessary cruelty. Vaelor stared at her. This was not the gentle queen who had endured his betrayal in silence. This was someone harder, forged in fire, someone who had learned that survival required speaking even when silence was easier. And she was right. What do you suggest? Lyssara set a lyra down, then moved to the war table. You're right about striking before they combine. But instead of annihilation, you offer terms after you win. You execute the leaders who planned this. You exile the commanders who carried it out. But you spare the soldiers who were following orders. You show the empire that you are strong enough to win and wise enough to know when to stop. Vaelor considered. Every instinct screamed to crush them completely. But Lyssara was offering something harder, the kind of strength that requires restraint. If I do this, if I show mercy after winning, some will see it as weakness. Let them. I would rather rule beside a king who listens than serve a tyrant who does not. Vaelor nodded slowly. All right, we do it your way. We win the war, execute leadership, show mercy to followers. Lyssara almost smiled. Good. Now go prepare your armies. Science. Dawn came cold and clear. 5 strike forces marched out of the capital with orders that were brutal and precise. Engage. Win. Execute leadership. Spare followers. Vaelor rode with the central force, leading from the front. The first engagement came on the second day. House Brennan had mobilized 3,000 warriors. Vaelor's force numbered 1,500, but they had high ground and surprise and cavalry that hit like hammered thunder. The battle lasted 2 hours. Brutal. Bloody. Exactly as violent as war always is. Vaelor fought in the center of it, sword in hand, armor slick with blood that was not his own. When the fighting ended and House Brennan's forces broke and ran, Vaelor did not pursue. He captured the commanders, held a field tribunal, found them guilty of treason, and executed them in front of their own warriors. Then he spoke to the survivors. You followed orders. I understand that. But your leaders are dead. Your house is forfeit. You live. You return to your homes. You rebuild your lives as citizens of the empire. And if you ever raise arms against the throne again, I will not show this mercy twice. He turned to his own warriors. Let them go. The survivors of House Brennan staggered away, bloodied and broken but alive. And word began to spread. The Alpha King was not slaughtering defeated enemies. He was executing leaders and sparing followers, showing strength through restraint instead of massacre. 4 more battles followed in the next week. Each one played out similarly: fast strikes, decisive victories, executed leadership, spared followers. And slowly, the rebellion collapsed. Houses that had been marching south began turning back. The northern territories began pulling back from the brink, not because they feared annihilation, but because Vaelor had shown them something they did not expect: a king who could win without becoming a monster. On the 10th day, Vaelor returned to the capital, victorious, bloodied, exhausted, but alive. The council met him at the gates. Your Majesty, a glorious victory. Vaelor dismounted. Not glorious, necessary. There is nothing glorious about war. He walked past them into the palace. He went directly to the east wing, to his family. Inside, Lyssara sat by the fire, holding a lyra and singing softly. She looked up as he entered, her eyes widened. You are hurt. Vaelor looked down. Blood soaked through a gap in his armor. Nothing serious. Sit down before you fall down. He sat. She called for a medic, then stood in front of him. You won. Yes, and you showed mercy. Yes, good. When the injury was cleaned and bandaged, she finally spoke. The council will want a grand celebration. What will you do? He looked at her, at his daughter sleeping in her arms. I will do whatever you think is right. Lyssara blinked, surprise flickering across her face. What I think? Yes, you were right about how to handle the war, so I am asking, what should I do? She stared at him for a long moment, testing whether he meant it. Then slowly she spoke. Hold a ceremony. Honor the warriors who fought. But do not celebrate death. Show the Empire that strength is not about how many people you can kill. It is about how many you can protect. Vaelor nodded. All right. That is what I will do. He stood slowly, his body protesting every movement. But before he could leave, Lyssara reached out and touched his arm. The first voluntary touch she had initiated since winter. Vaelor. Yes? Thank you for listening. He met her eyes. Always. The word hung between them. A promise. A commitment. The beginning of something that might, eventually, become real partnership. Not perfect. Not easy. But honest. And maybe that was enough. Outside the window, the Empire stretched in all directions. Safe for now. And standing between chaos and his family was Vaelor. No longer the arrogant king who believed power excused cruelty, but not yet the man he was trying to become. Somewhere in between. Learning, growing, changing, one choice at a time. And as he left to prepare for ceremonies and councils, he carried with him a single thought. That maybe redemption was not about erasing the past. Maybe it was about building a future where past mistakes became lessons instead of chains. The road ahead was long, uncertain, terrifying in its lack of guarantees. But for the first time since Lyssara had left, Vaelor felt something that had been absent for months. Hope. Not the blind optimism of someone who has never failed, but the hard-won hope of someone who has lost everything and discovered that survival is possible, that growth is possible, that becoming better is always possible, if you choose it, every single day, without exception, until the day you die, or the day you finally become the person you were always meant to be, whichever comes first. The ceremony took place 3 days after Vaelor returned from war, not in the grand sapphire hall where he had destroyed his marriage months ago, but in the courtyard beneath open sky where thousands could gather to witness what their king had become. Citizens packed the space. Warriors stood at attention. Council members watched from elevated platforms. And at the center of it all, Vaelor stood without his crown. He wore simple battle armor, still scarred from recent fighting. No gold, no ceremony. Just a man who had gone to war and come back changed. Lyssara stood beside him, holding a lyra. Not behind the throne as decoration. Beside him as equal. The symbolism was not lost on anyone watching. This was not the distant, ornamental queen they remembered. This was a woman who had survived kidnapping, protected her child, and somehow convinced a wolf king to show mercy when rage would have been easier. Vaelor raised his hand and the crowd fell silent. His voice carried across the courtyard without effort. 3 weeks ago, my family was taken. Threatened. Nearly killed by men who believed they could use the people I love as weapons against the throne. He paused, letting the word settle. They were wrong. Not because I'm stronger than them, but because they fundamentally misunderstood what strength means. People leaned forward listening. I was taught that kings rule through fear, that showing mercy is weakness, that love makes you vulnerable to manipulation. His eyes swept across the crowd. My father believed this. I believed this. And I was wrong. Murmurs rippled through the gathered citizens. An alpha king admitting fault was unprecedented. The northern houses rebelled because they saw how I treated my queen. They saw public humiliation and private betrayal, and they believed that a king who dishonored his mate would dishonor his word. He looked at Lyssara. She met his gaze without flinching. They were right. The crowd went silent. I dishonored my mate. I dishonored my bond. I dishonored every value this empire claims to hold sacred. And when Queen Lyssara left, I told myself it was her failure, her weakness, her inability to endure what queens must endure. His voice hardened. I was a fool. He turned to face the crowd fully. So I went to war. And I won. 5 houses crushed. Their leadership executed. Their armies scattered. But I did not slaughter every soldier who followed bad orders. I showed mercy to men who were simply doing what their lords commanded. He gestured to the gathered warriors behind him. My own soldiers questioned this decision, thought it was weakness, thought I should have burned the north to ash and left nothing but warning for future generations. Vaelor's expression was steel. But mercy is not weakness. Mercy is strength exercised with wisdom. It is knowing when violence serves purpose and when it only serves rage. The crowd absorbed this, uncertain how to respond. Kings did not speak this way. Kings did not question themselves publicly. Kings did not admit they had been wrong. But Vaelor was doing all three. Because that was the only way forward. Not through pretending the past had not happened, but through acknowledging it and choosing to be different. This empire will change, starting now. No more will bonded mates be treated as property. No more will emotional cruelty be dismissed as private matter. No more will power excuse betrayal. He looked directly at the council members. Any noble who dishonors their mate will answer to the throne. Any leader who uses their position to abuse those weaker will face consequences. And any house that threatens this empire or its people will be destroyed. His voice dropped lower. More dangerous. But we will not become tyrants in the name of protection. We will be strong and just. We will defend without becoming the monsters we fight against. He paused, then spoke words that would echo through the empire for generations. A king who needs fear to rule is not a king. He is just a man with a sword who has not yet been stopped. Silence held for 3 heartbeats. Then someone in the crowd began to clap. Others joined. Within moments, the courtyard erupted in applause that was not ceremonial or forced. It was real, genuine, because Vaelor had given them something no king had offered in living memory: honesty. Not performance, not propaganda, just brutal, uncomfortable truth about power and failure and the hard work of becoming better. The ceremony continued with honors given to warriors who had fought, gold distributed to families who had lost loved ones, public acknowledgement of sacrifice and cost. But everyone present understood that the real moment had already happened. An alpha king had stood before his empire and admitted he had been wrong, had chosen mercy over massacre, had elevated his queen to equal standing, and in doing so, had shown them that strength is not about never falling. It is about getting back up and being honest about what knocked you down. That night, Vaelor found Lyssara in the gardens overlooking the city. She stood alone, wrapped in a cloak against the evening chill. Alira slept in a cradle nearby, watched over by guards positioned at respectful distance. Vaelor approached slowly, uncertain if his presence was welcome. Lyssara did not turn, but she spoke. That was quite a speech. He stopped beside her, looking out at the lights of the capital spread below. I meant every word. I know, that is what surprised me. She glanced at him. The old Vaelor would have blamed me publicly, would have found a way to make my leaving seem like abandonment rather than survival. But you stood there and took responsibility, in front of everyone. He nodded slowly. Because it was my fault, all of it, and pretending otherwise would just be repeating the same pattern. They stood in silence for a moment. The wind moved through the garden, carrying the scent of night-blooming flowers. Finally, Lyssara spoke again. I have been thinking about what happens now. Vaelor's chest tightened. And I do not know if I can forgive you. Not yet, maybe not ever. The words hurt, but he accepted them without protest. I understand, but I think I can learn to trust you again. If you keep being this person, the one who admits fault and listens and chooses wisdom over pride. She turned to face him fully. That will take time, Vaelor. Years, maybe. And there will be moments when I remember what you did and it will hurt all over again. Moments when I question whether this change is real or just another performance. He met her eyes. I know, and when those moments come, I will not blame you for doubting. I will just keep proving it through action. Lyssara studied him in the moonlight. Why now? Why did it take losing everything for you to understand? Vaelor was quiet for a long time before answering. Because I was raised to believe that needing people made you weak. That love was a liability kings could not afford. My father died alone because everyone who ever claimed to love him was just afraid of him. He looked at Lyssara sleeping peacefully, and I was becoming him. Using people, discarding them when they stopped serving my purposes, convincing myself that power made me invulnerable. His voice roughened. Then you left. And I felt that bond stretch across miles and realized I was not invulnerable. I was just isolated. And isolation is not strength. It is just loneliness that you have stopped admitting hurts. Lyssara's expression softened slightly. So what changed? Everything. I stopped trying to be what my father taught me to be. Stopped believing that kings must be monsters to survive. Started understanding that the strongest people are not the ones who never break. They are the ones who break and rebuild themselves into something better. He gestured toward the sleeping baby. She changed me. Seeing her. Knowing I had a daughter who would watch how I treated you and learn from that what to expect from men. I could not let her grow up thinking love looks like what I did to you. Lyssara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that surprised him. I am proud of you. Vaelor blinked. What? I am proud of you. For changing. For admitting fault. For showing the Empire that strength and mercy can coexist. That took courage. She stepped closer. Not the courage of battle. That is easy for you. But the courage to be vulnerable in front of thousands of people. To admit you were wrong when you could have blamed me or circumstances or anything else. That is harder than any war. Vaelor felt something in his chest crack open. Not break, but open. Like a door that had been locked for decades, finally allowing light inside. Thank you, he said quietly. Do not thank me yet. This is just the beginning. You will mess up again, say the wrong thing, make decisions that hurt me. That is inevitable when two people try to build something real. She met his eyes. The difference is whether you own those mistakes or hide them. Whether you listen when I tell you something is wrong or dismiss it because it is inconvenient. Whether you keep choosing us over your pride every single day. I will. We will see. She turned back toward the city. But I think you might. And that is more than I believed possible 6 months ago. They stood together in the garden as night deepened around them. Not touching, not reconciled, but existing in the same space with honesty instead of performance. And that was enough. For now. Weeks turned into months. The Empire settled into new rhythms. Northern houses, seeing that rebellion brought swift justice but mercy for followers, chose loyalty over continued resistance. The council, initially resistant to changes in royal authority, gradually accepted that the queen's voice carried equal weight. Citizens watched their king and queen navigate public life with a partnership that looked nothing like traditional royal marriages. They argued in council meetings, disagreed on policy, made each other visibly frustrated, but they did it as equals, not as king and decoration, as partners who respected each other enough to voice opposition. And somehow that made the empire stronger, because when subjects see their leaders treating each other with dignity, they begin to expect the same in their own lives. Standards rise, cruelty becomes less acceptable. Power without integrity begins to look like what it actually is, weakness disguised as strength. Lyssara slowly began to soften, not quickly, not dramatically, but in small moments that accumulated over time. She laughed at one of Vaelor's dry observations during a council meeting. Let him hold Lyssara without supervision, touched his arm when passing in corridors, small gestures that meant everything because they were voluntary. Given freely rather than demanded. Vaelor noticed each one and treasured them without making a show of it, because that was the difference between the man he had been and the man he was becoming. The old Vaelor would have seen those small gestures as proof he had won her back. The new one understood they were proof she was choosing to trust again. And trust, once broken, is always a gift when given again, never an obligation. 6 months after returning from war, Vaelor woke in the middle of the night to find Lyssara's side of their bed empty. They had been sleeping in the same chambers for weeks, but maintaining careful distance. Two people sharing space, but not intimacy. He found her in the nursery, sitting in the rocking chair with Lyssara. The baby was awake but quiet, staring at her mother with the intense focus infants have when they are learning faces. Vaelor stood in the doorway, unsure if he should interrupt. Lyssara looked up. She is teething, Cannot sleep. Can I help? You can sit if you want. He entered and sat on the floor beside the rocking chair. For a while, neither spoke, just existed in the peaceful darkness, while Lyra made small sounds and Lyssara rocked gently. Finally, Vaelor broke the silence. I was wrong about so many things, but I think I was most wrong about believing I could be strong alone, that needing people made me vulnerable. Lyssara glanced at him. And now? Now I understand that the strongest people are the ones brave enough to need others, to build families and partnerships and connections that make life mean something beyond conquest and legacy. He looked at Lyra. She makes me vulnerable. If someone hurts her, they destroy me. That terrifies me. But I would not trade it for anything. Because she also makes me braver, makes me want to be better, makes every choice matter in a way nothing else ever has. Lyssara was quiet for a moment. Then she reached down and touched his shoulder. Just a brief contact, but it felt like forgiveness beginning to take root. You are a better father than your father was. That is a low bar. She almost smiled. True. But you are clearing it, and that matters. They sat in comfortable silence until Lyra fell asleep again. Lyssara stood carefully and placed the baby in the cradle. Then she turned to Vaelor. I think I am ready. Ready for what? To try. Really try. Not just existing in the same space, but actually rebuilding what was broken. Vaelor stood slowly, afraid to hope too much. What changed? She gestured around the nursery, the walls where children's drawings had been hung, the toys made from carved wood, the care taken to make this space warm and safe. You changed, consistently, for months, without demanding credit or recognition. You just kept being better, kept listening, kept choosing us over your pride. She moved closer. That is not performance, Vaelor. That is transformation. And I think I can trust that. He felt his throat tighten. I will not be perfect. I will still mess up. I know. But I think you will own it when you do. And that is what matters. She reached up and touched his face, the first truly intimate gesture since winter. I loved you even when I should not have, even when you did not deserve it. And part of me never stopped. But love is not enough by itself. It needs respect and trust and partnership. I know. So we try again, slowly, carefully, with honest boundaries and real communication, and we see if we can build something better than what we had before. Vaelor covered her hand with his. I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of this chance. Good, because I will not give you another one. Fair. They stood close in the darkness, not quite embracing but not distant either. Two people who had destroyed each other and somehow found the courage to try rebuilding. Not because it was easy, not because the past had been erased, but because they had both chosen to become people capable of something better. And that choice, made daily, was stronger than any bond or ceremony or crown. 1 year after Lyssara returned to the palace, the empire held a celebration. Not for military victory, not for political alliance, for the royal family's first year of true partnership. Citizens gathered in streets decorated with lights and flowers. Musicians played. Merchants sold food and drink. Children ran through crowds with painted faces. And in the palace, Vaelor and Lyssara stood on a balcony overlooking it all. Lyra sat between them, now old enough to look around with curious eyes and point at lights that caught her attention. She looks like you, Vaelor said. Lyssara smiled. She has your stubbornness. That comes from you. They both laughed. Real laughter, easy and comfortable and born from genuine affection rather than performance. Below them, the empire celebrated. Not because they had been commanded to, but because they wanted to honor a royal couple who had shown them that power without integrity is hollow. That strength includes admitting fault. That love worth having requires continuous work and cannot survive on ceremony alone. Vaelor looked at Lyssara. Are you happy? She considered the question seriously. Not always. There are still hard days, moments when I remember what happened and it hurts, times when I question whether this is real or temporary. She met his eyes. But yes, more often than not, I am happy, because this feels real, earned, built on truth instead of illusion. Good, because I wake up every morning terrified I will do something to lose you again. She took his hand. That fear is healthy. It means you understand what you have. The day you stop being afraid of losing me is the day I should actually worry. Vaelor squeezed her hand gently. Then I will be afraid forever. Good. They stood together watching their empire celebrate. A family built from ruins. An empire learning that strength comes not from conquest but from integrity. A king who had learned the hardest lesson of all. That power is meaningless without people worth protecting. That crowns are just metal without the responsibility to use authority wisely. That the strongest men are not the ones who never fall, but the ones who get back up and admit what knocked them down. Lyssara made a sound and pointed at fireworks beginning to light the sky. Both parents leaned close, showing her the colors exploding overhead. Gold, silver, blue, each one reflecting in her wide eyes. And in that moment, Vaelor understood something profound. This was the legacy that mattered. Not territory conquered, not enemies defeated, but a daughter who would grow up watching her parents treat each other with respect. Who would learn that strength includes vulnerability, that leadership requires listening, that love worth having demands continuous choice rather than comfortable habit. She would inherit an empire. But more importantly, she would inherit the knowledge that power is worthless if it requires becoming something monstrous to keep. That redemption is possible for anyone willing to do the work. That broken things can be rebuilt if both people choose healing over pride. The fireworks continued, the crowd cheered, and on the balcony, a family stood together. Not perfect, not without scars, but real, honest, whole in the way that only broken things carefully mended can be. Because sometimes the strongest bonds are not the ones that never break. They are the ones that break and are rebuilt with full knowledge of what was lost, with commitment to never repeat the same mistakes, with understanding that trust is not given once, but earned daily through small choices that accumulate into transformation. Vaelor looked at his wife and daughter, his family, his reason for being better than he had been, and he made a silent promise that needed no words, to choose them, every single day, without exception, for the rest of his life. Not because duty demanded it, not because the bond required it, but because love, real love, is not something you feel. It is something you do. Every morning when you wake up and decide to be worthy of the people who trust you. Every moment when pride and honesty conflict and you choose honesty. Every time when comfort and growth pull in different directions and you choose growth. That is love. And Vaelor had learned it the hardest way possible, by losing it. And somehow, impossibly, being given the chance to earn it back. He would not waste that gift. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. The fireworks reached their crescendo. The empire cheered, and the Alpha King held his family close, finally understanding what it meant to be truly strong.